I don't know if we have a quorum now, if you want to go ahead and get started, and we can plug in Mary when Mandy when he gets on.
And we're good with that. If you're good, Madam Chair, as long as we
Yes.
have a quorum, we can keep it moving.
Great. If we have a quorum, let's. It is 10:04 on August 6, 2021. And I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Speech Language Pathologists and Audiologists Advisory Board. We do ask that everyone mute your microphones when you're not speaking and just turn it on when you're going to speak. And then remember, just like when we meet face to face, speak up and say your name as you get ready to speak. I'm Sherry Sensibrian, the presiding officer of this board. So if everyone will try to remember to do that, I know that's always hard for me to remember. Angelica, could you manage the roll call for us, please?
Yes, ma'am. Sherry Sensibrian, presiding officer.
Here.
Emmanuel Bodner.
Good morning.
I see Mr. Bodner. Good morning, Mr. Bodner. Chevelle Bryant.
Here.
Thank you.
Dr. Tammy Camp. Dr. Kristen Culp.
I'm here.
Christina Kelly.
Here.
Kimberly Ringer. And Elizabeth Sterling. I think you're muted, Ms. Sterling.
You hear me now? Yes,
Yes.
I'm here.
Thank you.
There we
You have
go.
a quorum.
Thank you, Angelica. Angelica distributed the minutes of our previous meeting, January 24th, 2020. Seems like a very long time ago. And I would accept a motion to approve those minutes at this time. Kristen Kelly moves, seconded by
No.
Elizabeth Sterling, second.
Elizabeth Sterling, second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Or raise your hand so we can see you, I guess.
Aye.
Do a roll call as well.
Here we go. Does that work? Thank
May I
you.
ask-
Motion carried.
May
Yes.
I ask a question? This is Christina Kelly. I remember that there were quite a few work groups that were developed in the discussion, and I know that I participated in a call with Katie sometime back, and there was some additional discussion on that call that there would be some ongoing development of those groups that we reviewed, and I know we have all lived in a very funny time. So I was just curious to know if there's going to be some progress moving forward to those work groups and where we stand with those.
So, Ms. Kelly, Mary Winston here. I see Katie popped in on cue. And so that's perfect. So she'll follow up with that. And because this is just a meeting that we called emergency to handle one specific issue, we didn't cover any of that in this agenda. But Katie?
Yes, Katie Bryce with RPM. I was just going to say that we do have some work group reports on the agenda for the actual meeting on August 20th. So we'll be going over some of the work groups that did meet, giving their reports then. Does that answer the question?
That's great. Just knowing that we're talking about that in the future is great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Item D on our agenda, Sherry Sensibrian again. Item D is public comment, and we have no public comment for this meeting. So we can move along to item E, and I'd like to call on Wendy Pello to address items E, F, and G as they're all related.
Thank you. This is Wendy Pello, Senior Assistant General Counsel. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a very focused meeting regarding the waivers that were granted during COVID-19 and an emergency rulemaking that's going to follow. Just in terms of a little bit of background with item E, this is discussion about the waivers and then proposed rulemaking. I know this is different and new for a lot of people in terms of both doing the waivers and doing the emergency rulemaking. So wanted to give a little bit of discussion under E before we got into agenda item F with the specific emergency rules. Under item E, the governor had on March 13, 2020, had issued a disaster declaration regarding COVID-19 and having it be an imminent threat of disaster for all the counties in Texas. That disaster declaration is still in effect. As part of the governor's powers, when the disaster declaration has been issued, that he can suspend certain statutes and rules that would may prevent or hinder or delay any necessary actions in helping with that or coping with the disaster. So on March 22nd, the department, along with many other agencies, we had requested emergency waivers or a temporary suspension of certain rules relating to telehealth for our healthcare programs or health-related programs. And specifically for the speech language pathologists and audiologists program, we had requested waiving certain rules under Chapter 111 in order to remove restrictions that would expand the provision of telehealth services to clients and would expand supervision to certain licensees through telehealth and would remove any restrictions that would cause barriers to that. So specifically for these waivers allowed for additional licensees to provide telehealth services, including the speech language pathology interns and assistants. It allowed for expanded use of technologies in terms of smartphones and two-way audio video types of telecommunications technology. Allowed for expanded use of facilitators as well. And it also made changes as it related to supervision. It allowed for direct and indirect supervision to be provided through telehealth. It removed in-person supervision requirements, removed caps and restrictions on the amount of supervision that could be provided through telehealth, and then it removed the in-person initial client contact requirements that were found in the joint rules. We have submitted that waiver request. The governor granted the waiver request on April 8th, and so on April 9th, the department published the notice of that to our licensees. It was published on our websites and out through our GovDelivery email notices. And since that time, the providers have been providing services according to those waivers and expanded use of telehealth and telesupervision since that time, since April 2020. We wanted to let you know that those telehealth waivers for our health programs are being rescinded. A notice was sent July 20th and a request was submitted July 20th, and that's been approved. And so for the telehealth waivers that were granted for the speech language pathology and audiology program, those waivers will be terminated effective September 1st, 2021, which kind of pulls us into the reason of why having emergency rules and having this meeting today. The department is going to propose telehealth rules for adoption by the commission, and in accordance with, we had a new Senate Bill 40, which is a telehealth bill that provides, that applies to TLR's health program specifically. So we'll be implementing permanent rules, and we expected those to be completed early 2022. But to ensure and to prevent a gap in services between the end of the waiver on September 1st and when those permanent rules are adopted, the department is proposing and recommending to the commission to adopt emergency rules that would ensure that the services that have been provided through telehealth and the supervision of certain licensees that have been provided through telehealth will continue as they were under the waivers, but continue under emergency rules. Now with emergency rulemaking, it's not done very often. It's restricted in terms of why an agency could do an emergency rulemaking. One of it is it's to if there's imminent peril to the public health, safety, or welfare. With emergency rulemaking, there's no notice or abbreviated notice. It doesn't go through the usual standard rulemaking process where you publish the proposed rules in the Texas Register. You have 30-day public comment period, open for comments to have that discussion. This is on an expedited basis because there's an emergency need. The other part of that is those emergency rules are temporary. They're only good or effective for 120 days. There is the option for a one-time 60-day extension, which would be for 180 days. So they are temporary. So that is that balance. If an agency wants to adopt those rules on a permanent basis, they need to go through the standard rulemaking process.
Wendy?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I did want to acknowledge for the record that Ms. Ringer is here. And so we have not only a quorum, we have a super quorum. Thank you everyone for being in attendance. Sorry to break your rhythm there, but I
That's
wanted to
okay.
get that in the record.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate that. So in this case, in terms of looking at this situation for the speech language pathologists and audiologists and the waivers that were granted, the emergency rulemaking, to us, there is an imminent peril to public health safety because there's concern about the disruption of services. There's kind of, as you call it, maybe a new status quo, new normal in terms of how services have been provided through telehealth since April of 2020, which is year and 4 months, and how licensees or how like speech language pathology interns and assistants, and as well as the audiology interns and assistants have been supervised through telehealth. And especially we don't want services being disrupted in continuity care and services to clients, especially in terms of the waivers that have been granted. Termination of those waivers without emergency rules would reduce the number of providers who are now eligible to provide teleservices, reduce the number of clients that a provider could serve in a given amount of time, have a negative impact on clients having timely access to service. And it would also require a return to in-person services and in-person supervision. So this emergency rules is filling that gap. And it gives us time to adopt permanent rules and look at that, but it's done on an emergency basis to fill that gap so there isn't this abrupt disruption of services come September 1st, 2021. So that's what the emergency rules are doing. So I don't know if you have any questions on that. And it's basically, we can't continue the waivers, but it's continuing how you've been practicing and delivering services, not under the waivers, but under emergency rules. Questions or thoughts? Okay. If you're ready, I can. Madam Chair, did you have?
I think we're ready to move on if
Okay.
anyone has a question. Thank you.
Okay. And then moving on to item C, or sorry, item F, which are the emergency rules. What we've done here, and I'm going to share my screen. What we've done here in these if you are you all able to see that, the emergency rules? These are included in your packet of materials. What we've done is you can say it, great, is translate, I'm sorry, is translating the waivers into emergency rules. And so when they expanded the providers who could be a provider, we've expanded the definition of provider. There are provisions that waive certain provisions to make sure that in-person or direct and indirect supervision could be performed through telehealth. So just kind of hitting those highlights under subsection or subchapter A, section 111.2, it gets to the definitions of direct supervision related to assistants, direct supervision interns, and making sure that that supervision can be formed in person or telehealth. The other thing we've done in recognizing is references that either to telepractice or telepractice/telehealth have been done to telehealth, and that is recognizing the change in the statutory change, and it's mostly with the joint rules, and we'll get to those in a moment, but reflects the kind of the common terminology that's used in our Senate Bill 40 that amended our Occupations Code Chapter 51, our enabling statute, but also reflects the terminology that's in Occupations Code Chapter 111, which is the telemedicine telehealth chapter as well. We've got the same thing. It waives requirements regarding in-person. So we've updated the definition of in-person and moved this concept of telehealth not being considered in person. And the same with indirect supervision to assistants, indirect supervision to interns, and these is updates to terminology. And I'm just going to scroll through. If you've got questions, please feel free to jump in. Under subject E with the interns for the speech language pathology license, where we've updated under section 41. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Wendy, I'm sorry to interrupt. Let me catch you. If you could scroll scroll back a little bit. There was a telehealth and a telepractice. I'm not sure I understand what the difference is or what the intent of the words are.
The references that were in here with telepractice, telehealth is because when we looked through the sections, there were inconsistent, both terms were being used for the same, with the same definition. And so this was to clean up, to have a consistent term across sections. And so references, whether it was to telepractice by itself or telepractice less telehealth, those have been replaced with just telehealth.
Or thank
So,
you.
yeah. And so there's a consistent message on that. Under 11141, this is subsection D with the intern requirements. Sorry, just scrolled past it. This is requiring getting rid of, this is one of the examples of places where getting rid of the in-person requirement, direct supervision being in person or at the workplace, having be indicating a physical location, services being provided or supervision being provided. And again, this is dates back with the COVID-19 in terms of people being sent home, businesses being shut, people stay-at-home orders in terms of making sure we can continue those client services clients through telehealth and eliminating these barriers that may require in-person or being physically located at the same location. Under 50, it is subsection E.
I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt again, but let me just be clear in my own mind that this does not prohibit in person. It only adds the option of the telehealth. Is that correct?
Right. There were requirements within the rules in specific places where there be certain types of supervision or whether the internship or certain duties that were provided that required in-person direct supervision. The requirements about in-person are being removed. Yes, so it allows the direct supervision to be in person or through telehealth.
Okay,
So it
thank
removes
you.
that restriction. So you'll see those kind of those examples throughout here under 50C. Sorry, subsection E. Here is again another in-person direct supervision. So that in-person has been taken out. So there's lots of sections here, but there, many subsections aren't affected. It's cleaning up. It's trying to translate those waivers that remove that in-person supervision requirement throughout those rules. And the goal is to make this seamless as possible from what the waivers allowed to what these emergency rules will allow. Under 51, subsection E is allowed. This is talking about direct supervision, and again, getting rid of these kind of concepts of at the work site being physically present. So that will allow supervision through telehealth. And then subsection G, this is one of the waivers, was eliminating any caps or restrictions on the amount of supervision that could be provided through telehealth. And so we still left the 4 years or 4 hours of direct, the remaining is indirect, but these caps and restrictions on how much had to be in person and how much could be through telehealth has been removed. And then this provision stating that the direct and indirect supervision may be provided through telehealth, and that was in accordance with the waiver. Under 91, we've got subsection F. And again, this is another place where there were restrictions, not on the number of hours, but on terms of which duties. There was restrictions in here that certain duties had to be provided with in-person direct supervision. So that's been removed. And again, a similar provision regarding direct and indirect supervision being allowed through telehealth. And to correspond with that change, under 92, again, this is the audiology assistant license. These were the 4 duties, the C1 through 4 were the duties that were requiring in-person direct supervision. Direct supervision is still there. The indirect references have been removed from these 4. So a lot of those provisions that we've gone through up until this point have been about the supervision of the licensees. The provisions kind of following with telehealth really kind of gets into the telehealth provision and services to clients. One of the big changes here, and this was granted by the waiver, was expanding the definition of provider to include speech language pathology interns and speech language pathology assistants. To correspond with that change of who the provider is, references under definition 4 with facilitator, and then under provider site that were specific to the speech language pathology audiologists have been referenced to the provider. And here's the first example with telecommunications technology. This is expanding that to allow smartphones, any audiovisual real-time two-way interactive communication to be there. And part of this is because this definition had talked about telephones, and telephones, email, and facsimile are not considered telecommunications, but we wanted to make sure that when we talk about telephones, smartphones could be telecommunications technology. So it reflects that change. And Mr. Bodner, this kind of gets to the issue you raised earlier about the telehealth, telepractice. We've got definitions of telehealth, telehealth services, telepractice service. These 2 definitions with telepractice and telepractice services have been removed. They're unnecessary. We've got the definitions here with telehealth and teleservices. And those were terms that were kind of, I think in the past used interchangeably, and also because the joint rules in that statute use the term telepractice. So those are being removed there. Under 211, 111, 211,
Wendy,
yes.
Wendy, I have another question.
Yes.
As we're going as through these, you point out the facsimile machine and these other kinds of machines, and now there's smartphones and other kinds of things. Is there a way to write a rule, or should we even consider it, for future ways of communication? And so we don't necessarily need to go through the rules when a new form of communication is invented.
And that's a good question. I think, like I said, we're going to do permanent rules, so that would be a good way in terms of having that discussion. We do the permanent rules in terms of, is there a better way to write this? Right now, for these changes, we're trying to reflect kind of the specific waivers that were granted for the existing rules we have. But I think you raise a good point in terms of, is there a way to draft this so it doesn't become outdated, next month, next year, because there's new technology to do that.
This is Sherison Cibrian. Mr. Bodner, Wendy, I actually think that the work group that worked on this previously did a good job, because what is now re-lettered as item D says other technology that facilitates the delivery of telehealth services. Since we can't predict, who knows what we'll have 5 years from now, that might cover us for a very long time without having to be more specific.
Right. But we can definitely, yeah, and I appreciate both of those comments. It's important to make sure when we look at this going forward that we've left enough room to have new technologies, whatever that may be. Yet the issue with this was the fact that it was left as telephone, email, facsimile, and we wanted to make sure that smartphones weren't captured in that those would still be allowed to be captured here. under 111.211, the service delivery models, this was existing rules as just speech language pathologist, but due to the change in scope of the providers, that title's been changed just to speech language pathology. And again, here we've updated references from telepractice, and here it's telehealth service in both of these cases. Under 111.212, requirements of the use of telehealth, and we've changed the title, again, expanded scope of providers. Here we've made clear that the requirements are applying to a provider who is the speech language pathologist. Yes, Mr. Bowden.
I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but I don't quite I, it, for me, it's confusing. When you take out by speech language pathologist, your requirements for use of, of telehealth and speech language pathology. Now, why would you remove by speech language pathologists?
Because this scope is not longer just the licensed speech language pathologist, it's also the speech language pathology interns and the speech language pathology assistants. This provision under the current rules was just for the licensed speech language pathologists. It wasn't the interns and it wasn't the assistants. Under the waivers that were granted, it allowed these two licensee types to provide telehealth services. And so that's what it was
I
just to
see, and it
clarify.
goes on to define that. Okay, I'm sorry. All right,
That's
thank you.
okay.
Thank you.
And so that's where we clarified that it's this broader scope. We have added the provision that was part of the waiver is that the speech language pathology assistants may provide services through health as directed by their supervisor and according to their practice and duties. So it's still tied to what they're allowed to do within their scope of practice, and it's under their supervisor's direction. So that's what the A is to reflect that. And then down in H is a provision. We addressed this several years ago with the initial contact between the provider and the client. It used to be at the same had to be at the same physical location. Initial contact had to be in person. This was changed several years ago to be maybe at the same physical location or through telehealth. And we've switched this from telehealth/telepractice. But because now the change in scope of who's provider, it's now been included to the speech language pathologist and the SLP intern, but it's not the assistant because under section 111.51F, the initial contact with a client has to be made by the supervisor. And so that's why we weren't including assistants in here and to make sure there wasn't a conflict between this provision and an earlier provision. So we've made that clear here. And again, we've changed references that were kind of the telehealth/telepractice that we're trying to address kind of the different terminology that was used in different provisions in the past, just cleaning that up to be telehealth. Same cleanups. 111.213 is being removed in its entirety, and this is a section about the limitations on using telecommunications technology in terms of supervising the assistants and the interns, and this is putting the restrictions on the number of hours that could be for supervision through telehealth. So this whole section is coming out. We didn't have any changes to point 214. Under point 215, this is it used to be telepractice, telehealth is relating to the audiology. This one has a lot of cleanup, and this, I think a lot of the terms stem from in part maybe because of the provisions that were in both the speech language pathology statute and the hearing instrument fitter statute about joint rules for fitting and dispensing hearing aids by telepractice. That is going away, and we'll get there, but this is cleaning up the terminology. One thing here is an example of under E and F1 is an example of expanding who can be a facilitator. Again, this was in light of COVID, people may be at home and the only person who could assist in the service may be a family member. And so this was expanding it to, allow for a facilitator to assist in providing services, eliminating the training as long as that provider had determined the person assisting, was competent to assist. And this was again with the waiver to expand the expanded use of facilitators. So that's what this change in E and F1 are. Again, changes from telepractice to telehealth. These provisions. And again, the similar provision that was for the audiology and the limitations on using technology, telecommunication technology for the audiology side, this is being removed as well. And this was the provision tied to an early provision with the restrictions on which services or which task had to have in-person direct supervision. And this is a change with the subchapter X, and this is formerly the joint rules for fitting and dispensing hearings by telepractice. One of the things trying to keep this close is to the waivers, but Senate Bill 40 passed and was effective immediately. And one of the it added new provisions about telehealth to our enabling statute under Occupation Chapter 51, but it also made changes to some of the other health programs. And one of the changes that they made was repealing the statutory provisions in both the speech language pathology and audiology statute under Occupations Chapter 401 and the hearing fitters and dispensers statute under Occupation Chapter 402, and it removed the requirement the commission adopt rules with both boards in terms of kind of having, they're commonly known as the joint rules for fitting and dispensing. And so because these provisions have been repealed, the rules are still here until we amend them or repeal them. But the statutory authority for them has changed. This is no longer the statutory authority. We do have statutory authority under Occupations 51, under Occupations Code Chapter 111, but these specific sites have come out. So this is not the waiver, but this is due to Senate Bill 40 that was effective immediately. So we do want to keep these emergency rules are keeping the existing rules in place until permanent rules can be adopted. But to do that, we need to make these small tweaks here. So again, yes, Mr. Brodner.
Uh,
You're on mute. I'm sorry. Mr. Brodner, I
Brodner,
believe you're on mute.
muted, sir. You gotta repeat everything verbatim.
See now, I sure have missed seeing you. I have to tell you, it's good to see you even on the screen. And so I don't wear a hearing aid. Maybe I should, but I don't. But I don't understand. It's telepractice and maybe I'm or telehealth, and maybe I'm not reading this right or understanding it correctly in fit or dispense a hearing instrument, because it would seem like you would have to be in person. Or is this not right? Is technology just so advanced you receive it through Amazon, you put it in, and you're instructed over the computer, and boom, it works? Is this how the profession works? I don't really know.
This is
Go ahead.
Dr. Cope. I can just quickly answer that. Yes, we do send them to patients with the correct programming. And this is only if they cannot come in. It's advised that they do make a trip in after they've been fit at home. All of that's done during with a portal like this and video conferencing with them to show them what they're doing and even change the settings through this same portal. So it's all doable remotely now.
and so, I have an instrument that is I'm trying to think of the word, but the readings, they're sent automatically. It's to my doctor, to my physician. Is this what this is? Is this the same technology, and very loosely, is this what it is? I mean, it's all
Right.
the
Yeah,
setting of it,
yeah,
so on and so
there
forth.
is ways,
You can do it
yes, through,
you can do it through the air.
through your phone, the app that goes with the hearing aids will send the information back and forth. Yes. Just like your other equipment.
That's well,
It
that's just
saved us.
one. That
It
just
saved us during COVID for sure.
I just applaud the professions. It's tremendous advancement.
Thank you.
Right. And for this section, this is related to the audiologist and who is a provider. It's the audiologist and it's the audiology interns, and for this particular program, and then for the hearing instrument fitters, it's the full licensed hearing fitter. So this doesn't apply to the speech language pathologist or the SLP interns, SLP assistants, or the audiology assistants is now. But yeah, these are the existing rules. The tweak we were making here is because we weren't referencing these two sections in the occupations code that have been repealed. The rules are still valid till repeal or amend them. We have the authority, but we're taking out these outdated references. And again, we want to keep the existing rules through the emergency rules until permanent rules can be adopted. So continue services as they are. So for this, under, trying to see where we've got a change in this, we've got, again, the same change over here in telecommunications technology that was made earlier in the telehealth section that applied more broadly. So we've got the definition here, same changes that have been made. References to telehealth services, there's a reference to telepractice. This is telepractice being removed. The definition of telepractice has been changed to telehealth for consistency. Definition has not changed. These two sections up here that were repealed, those were the provisions in the statute that referred to telepractice. You don't see that terminology in our Chapter 51 as amended by Senate 40, and you don't find that in the Occupation Code Chapter 111. So this makes consistency in the terms of the terminology. There's no change in the definition. And then for 111.232, here we've got, again, with E and F1, again, this is the facilitator. In terms of removing that, requiring them to have certain training requirements to expanded use. And again, this was what was allowed for the waiver in terms of if people were home and it was a family member who's able to assist and competently assist in that as well. Sure, got this. Again, references telepractice, telehealth. Here's this same requirement, or this is a very similar requirement that was found. This J that was found earlier in 111.212 relating to the speech language pathology, and that this requirement about this initial contact has to be in person, the same physical location. This was a provision that was waived. This is a provision that this board's addressed in the past in terms of making sure there's not any restrictions on access to care. There's not any anti-competitiveness as well. This is, you've got the initial, so it's kind of a variety of issues kind of tied up in this provision. What we had done here was use the language that was used earlier with the speech language pathology section, and having it be initial contact and be at the same physical location or telehealth as determined appropriate by the provider. And it's the provider's judgment. We've also carried over those same factors of what the provider needs to consider in terms of the client's abilities in determining what is appropriate to provide service via telehealth. And while these provisions are here, you've still got other provisions that have not been changed. I mean, the scope of practice with in-person And telehealth has to be the same. The provider has to be competent to provide and comfortable providing telehealth services. The equipment needs to be maintained in proper working order to be able to deliver those services. It's still, if it's up to the provider to determine whether providing a service through telehealth is appropriate. So there's still that determination. So again, this is not a requirement that services have to be through telehealth. It's allowing, again, being determined appropriate by the provider. But it's removing that blanket requirement that every initial contact with the client has to be in person. So that's what we've translated here. We've moved, like I said, used the same language as before. And then we've just relettered until practice. So those are the emergency rules. I didn't know if you had any comments or questions or.
So Sherry Sensibrian, thank you, Wendy, for going through all of that and also just helping us understand why, even though the legislature has passed legislation related to telehealth, that we still need to have our own set of rules under which to practice and these emergency rules to help us until we can get permanent rules in place. So thanks for such a thorough job. Does anyone have another concern or question that we need to cover? Great.
We would be asking for a recommendation from the advisory board that we can take to the commission about the adoption of the emergency rules. So feel comfortable doing a motion in a second, kind of getting the feedback from and a recommendation from the advisory board.
This is
If I could ask a question before we go that step, to ask of the chair, you're suggesting these are emergency rules. I understand that until permanent rules take place. So I would have to assume that at some future board meeting, we're going to take all of these rules and request that they be made permanent. Is that what I'm understanding?
Mr. Bodner, we're meeting again in August, and at that time, we'll be able to entertain the permanent version. But these are just the emergency rules that will help us get through until permanent rules could be promulgated. So thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Elizabeth Sterling? Can you
Yes,
Can you
Elizabeth?
hear me? Okay. I just wanted to thank you for all the work that you did in doing that. As a school person, I can tell you that it's been very difficult for us to get services happening. And now with being in stage 5, certainly in our area, we have schools that are now having to go back to providing virtual services to students. And so this was, people were sort of in a panic about the fact that they weren't going to be able to provide services virtually to students, that they were going to have to come in person. And we had parents who dropped services last year because of all of the chaos and not having enough providers. And so having these rules in place really helps students get services that are truly needed. And so I just wanted to put that out there, that the schools are in favor of having these emergency rules put in place.
Okay.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think this is a good example of TDLR listening to our stakeholders and making changes. I see Mr. Bodner.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry to keep. Oops.
You're muted again, Mr. Bodner.
How is this?
There you go.
Would you tell me? I'm sorry, I don't understand the term stage 5.
Oh.
So this is Elizabeth. So in our area, we have a very high prevalence of cases of COVID-19, the Delta variant of COVID-19. And as a result, schools are having to respond to parents being worried, especially ages 12 and under who can't get vaccinated, about sending their students all back in person to school. And so in a response, schools are now having to scramble and try to offer some virtual academies and virtual services and courses to parents who don't want to send their students to school. And this includes related services. And we want to make sure that parents don't opt out of related services that students need, and by still being able to provide those through teletherapy and virtually.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for those comments. At this time, do I hear a motion that we recommend that the commission adopt these emergency rules as presented?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Bodnar, seconded by Christina Kelly. So we have a move by Bodnar, second by Kelly. Angelica, could you poll the board for their vote, please?
Yes, ma'am. Presiding Officer Sherry San Cyprian,
Aye.
Emmanuel Bodnar,
Aye.
Paul Bryant,
Aye.
Dr. Kristen Culp,
Aye.
Christina Kelly,
Aye.
Kimberly Ringer,
Aye.
and Elizabeth Sterling.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Angelica.
Thank you.
Item G is back to Wendy Pillow, a little discussion about our next step in adopting emergency rules as permanent rules, which was kind of what Mr. Bodnar was asking about, I think, before.
Right. Thank you. Again, Wendy Pello, TDLR. The next steps, we'll be seeing everybody again in 2 weeks. We have a meeting scheduled for August 20th. It'll be more of a kind of traditional advisory board meeting with staff reports and other things, but this agenda item with the emergency rules will be back on there. One of the things with the emergency rules, it was limited to the waivers, but when we consider the permanent rules, we want to bring a proposal that has the emergency rules, but also addresses the Senate Bill 40 changes as well, other changes there, and also respond or include changes based on the input received as a result of the 4-year rule review as it relates to telehealth and telesupervision. So it'll be a much bigger package, but those emergency rules will be included in there. We are limited with emergency what the scope could be, but with the permanent rules, we can include those in there. It will be moving quickly on those, but we do want to get those, like I said, in permanent rules in place because the emergency rules, once if they're adopted and they go into effect, would be only effective for 120 days with the possibility of a 60-day extension for 180 days. But when we go through those permanent rules, that's when we would, publish the rules in the Texas Register, get the public comment, get input, more input from stakeholders as well. So it proceed with the kind of the standard rulemaking process that we're aware of, but that meeting will be August 20th.
Thank you, Wendy. Sherry San Cyprian, we're on to item H, which is the discussion of our next meeting, which is coming up just around the corner, August 20th at 9 a.m. It will also be a WebEx meeting, I think, right? Angelica, thank you. And at that time, we'll have all of the reports, as Wendy said, and that will be our chance to discuss some of these things. Wendy, what did you want to add?
I'm sorry, and just to back up on the other, just so you know, these rules in terms of next steps will be on the commission agenda for next Tuesday. They have a commission meeting agenda for next Tuesday, so these emergency rules will be on that agenda for their consideration. So apologize, needed to add that in there for next steps or what you saw where these emergency rules would go.
Great, thank you,
Madam
Wendy.
Chair.
And that's why we needed to have this quick meeting so that we could get it on the commission's agenda for next week. So thanks for doing that. And we'll be meeting in 2 weeks. And Angelica, Mary, Wendy, Katie, is there anything else that we need to cover today? Mary?
If Katie doesn't have anything, oh, I saw the boss raise his hand. Executive Director
We can let the
Francis.
boss go.
Madam Chair and Commission and board members, it's definitely a group effort here at TDLR, but if you didn't notice, Wendy did a fantastic job.
Oh,
And I want to just commend her for the hard work, and she sweats over every detail, every syllable, every word, every grammatical piece that's in there. And Wendy, you just did great. I think you you make our agency proud with the level of transparency and intellect that you bring to the table. So I didn't want the meeting to go without telling her great job.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And it is definitely a team effort as well.
Sorry, this is Katie Bryce, and I had wanted to say the same thing, that Wendy has just done a tremendous amount of work over the past year and almost a half with this program to get the emergency waivers approved and drafting the emergency rules, drafting the permanent rules, doing a rule review. I mean, it's been really impressive. So lots of people in the state of Texas are getting services because of the work she's done.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So,
Again,
Madam
team
Chair,
effort.
Madam Chair, this awesome effort, and really we're all Team Wendy because she does work so hard. And I mean, just say thank you, Wendy. I know we're like embarrassing you, but
Thank you.
she
I
thinks of
appreciate
every scenario, question, possibility. I love all my AGCs, but love when I have Wendy. I know there's no stone left unturned, right? So, and thank you
Thank
all
you.
members for coming. I know we've hounded a few of you and I appreciate it, but it was so important, so important. And Ms. Sterling, you just summed it up that this is necessary for the continuation and the kids. And thank you all for. I see several of you sitting in your offices, so we appreciate you. This ability to virtually meet is now a permanent ability after last session. And so, of course, we all want to see each other again, but we don't want to be in stage 5. So we'll work on that later. Madam Chair, this is a wrap as far as this issue that we had to discuss, and you can take it from here.
Thank you. And Sherry Sensebrine, Mary, I just can't resist saying you should always sit in that chair. You look so regal. When we meet face to face, I think you need to bring that chair.
I need to bring this chair. That's what I'm going to do.
Yes. So I think we've covered the business for today. Thank you, everybody, to help us get these emergency rules before the commission. As Elizabeth said so well, with school starting, it's even more important that this gets taken care of. We don't want to face the panic that we faced in March and April of 2020 again. So I think we've taken care of business. And it is now 10:55. And I think we can adjourn this meeting, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. We will
Thank you.
see you soon.